The U.S. Supreme Court, where I think these cases will wind up, could certainly issue a ruling that says that no state's allowed to use the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to bar Trump from running.
Second state has now banned Donald Trump from the presidential ballot. Maine has now followed Colorado in ruling that Trump can't be on the ticket in their state, citing a constitutional insurrection clause surrounding the January the 6th riots. Maine's Secretary of State, Shenna Bellows, explained the decision.
I am so mindful, and I said this in my decision, that it is unprecedented. No Secretary of State has ever deprived a presidential candidate of ballot access based on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. But no presidential candidate has ever engaged in insurrection and been disqualified under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment.
Well, I speak to Scott Lucas, a Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin. Good morning, Scott.
Good morning to you.
How significant is this?
It is significant. It's certainly not decisive, but there's three reasons why this is important. Maine has become the second state following Colorado to disqualify Trump from the Republican primary ballot. And that raises the prospect that there could be a snowball effect that other states could follow. Now, saying that, I think it's notable to add that in recent days, whereas the Colorado Supreme Court disqualified Trump, the Michigan courts have said, no, he can stay on the ballot. And whereas the Maine state government said, we're disqualifying him, the California state government actually said yesterday, no, he'll stay on the ballot. So you're going to get a patchwork of decisions probably in the next few days and few weeks. The second reason why it's significant, however, is because this is a state government decision. It's not just a court decision. So this now means the question of Trump, his insurrection, and whether he can stay on the ballot is now being fought, as it were, on two fronts, both through the courts and through the governments. And third, I think something that most outlets haven't picked up yet is Maine's right next door to New Hampshire. Now, New Hampshire is significant because it is the first Republican primary contest. It takes place on January 23rd. And Nikki Haley, the former U.S. ambassador to the UN, former governor of South Carolina, has been rising in the polls there. I think she is not, at this point, doesn't look like she'll pass Trump to win the primary. But if she runs a strong second in New Hampshire, that could sort of change the narrative that Trump's the heir apparent to take the Republican nomination. So what effect will Maine's decision have on voters next door in New Hampshire?
And this decision in Maine affects Trump's ability to run in the presidential primary there. So in order for him to become the Republican nominee, which even if he can't run in Maine, probably won't have too much of a difference because he's way ahead. He's reasonably likely to be the nominee anyway. But could this affect the general election? Will he be allowed to stand there in the general election? Because he did win an electoral vote last time round in Maine.
No, I mean, none of the decisions remove Trump. They have nothing to do with Trump on the general election ballot. We would have to go through that whole process again if Trump won the Republican nomination. But I've just got to roll back just a bit. And that is, there's sort of this narrative in the U.S. media, which is, well, Trump's going to win, Trump's going to win, Trump's going to win. He certainly, I think, is the favorite right now. And he certainly is ahead, for example, in the first caucus, the town hall meeting state of Iowa, which is on January the 15th. But again, by talking about Trump, it sucked all the oxygen where there haven't been attention to other Republican candidates, let alone the issues in the campaign. Despite all of that, Nikki Haley's risen from about 10% in the polls in New Hampshire to 30% in one poll last week. If that surge continues for Haley, and if she runs a strong second in New Hampshire, the next primary is in South Carolina, her home state. So I think we have to be careful here to say, oh, well, whatever happens with the legal process, whatever happens with Trump being on the ballots, he is inevitably going to be the Republican nominee.
That's really interesting. Well, there'll be a lot of people listening who are deeply concerned by the prospect of a return to the presidency for Trump. Who might be encouraged to hear you say that, Scott, but we shall see. Could this Maine ruling be overturned by the Supreme Court? Are we heading to the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. Now, I need to emphasize that the reason why this has come up is because U.S. elections are not run by the federal government. They're run by each of the 50 states, which is why you're getting this patchwork of decisions. But the U.S. Supreme Court, where I think these cases will wind up, could certainly issue a ruling that says that no state's allowed to use the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to bar Trump from running. But again, I would say for those who say it's inevitable that the U.S. Supreme Court will protect Trump by ruling that, I think it's quite likely. But please do remember that in December 2020, the Supreme Court refused to intervene on his behalf when he was trying to overturn the election in which he lost, which started the entire mess that we're talking about today.
And just finally, Scott, does this not play into the narrative that Donald Trump has been trying to spin for at least a year now, probably dating back to the 2020 presidential election, that somehow he is the victim of a stitch-up? Can he not claim that all these court rulings are just going to prove that somehow?
We don't know. Look, Donald Trump has played being the victim for decades. He did it as a businessman when he faced multiple court cases over his business practices and over his bankruptcies. He did it in 2016, playing the victim, insisting that the election was rigged, even though he won it. He played the victim over his 2 impeachments, which had serious evidence to support them. And he's playing the victim now. That's Trump's tactic. There will be some people who will buy into it, who are diehard Trumpists. There may be others who will not, who say, no, let's focus on the issues and focus on the fact that there was a coup attempt in 2021. I think what I wouldn't do as an analyst, and I urge people in media not to do this, is to predict what is going to happen. To predict, for example, it's like Trump inevitably he'll actually be boosted by these court and state decisions, or he will inevitably be defeated. Because that, again, sucks all the oxygen out of this in terms of that if there's a Trump circus, and if he can keep you focused on him as the ringmaster, the facts and ultimately the issues don't matter.
And after the last few years, anyone who tries to predict anything in world politics is really engaging in a fool's game, I suppose. Scott, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Scott Lucas, Professor of American Studies at University College Dublin.